The sound of the china crashing against the marble floor silenced the entire room. Everyone at Le Sommet, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, froze. Elijah Charles, a tech billionaire known for destroying companies and careers, stood over the young black waitress, his face twisted in a sneer. He pointed a manicured finger at a complex legal document written in technical Mandarin sitting on his table. "You clumsy, uneducated incompetence," he spat, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You think you deserve respect? If you're so smart, then pick that up and translate it. Go on, tell me what it says." He thought he had broken her. He had no idea he had just handed Ilara Moore the weapon that would end his career. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of New York evening where the wind cuts through your coat like a razor blade. Inside Le Sommet, however, the weather didn't exist. The air here was temperature-controlled to a perfect 70 degrees, scented with white truffle, aged mahogany, and the distinct metallic tang of old money. Ilara Moore adjusted her apron in the back of the house, staring at her reflection in the stainless steel of the industrial fridge. She looked tired. The dark circles under her eyes were fighting a losing battle against her concealer. She was 28, though she felt 40. Between the double shifts at the restaurant and the late nights spent caring for her mother, whose dialysis treatments were bleeding their savings dry, Ilara had forgotten what a full night of sleep felt like. "Ilara!" The sharp hiss of the floor manager, Henri, snapped her out of her trance. Henri was a small, nervous man who treated every dinner service like a bomb disposal operation. "Table 4, he's here. Do not, I repeat, do not mess this up." Ilara's stomach tightened. Table 4 was reserved for Elijah Charles. Everyone in the city knew the name. Elijah Charles was the CEO of EtherLogic, a data mining conglomerate that had recently been under scrutiny by the SEC, though nothing ever stuck. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, expensive suits that cost more than Ilara's yearly rent, and eyes that looked through people rather than at them. He was known for two things: his ruthless business acquisitions and his absolute intolerance for mediocrity. "I've got it, Henri," Ilara said, smoothing the front of her uniform. She took a deep breath, put on her customer service mask, a polite, subservient smile, and pushed through the swinging doors. The dining room was a sea of hushed conversations and clinking crystal. At table 4, the best seat in the house overlooking the skyline, Elijah Charles sat alone. He was furiously typing on a tablet, a glass of sparkling water untouched beside him. Ilara approached the table with the grace practiced over 5 years of service. "Good evening, Mr. Charles. Welcome back to Le Sommet. May I start you with sparkling water? No ice. Lemon on the side. Not in the glass," Elijah said without looking up. His voice was a low baritone, bored and dismissive. "And tell the sommelier if he brings me the 2018 vintage instead of the 2015 like he did last time, I'll have him fired before the appetizer arrives." "Of course, sir," Ilara said softly. She moved to adjust his cutlery, her hand brushing the edge of the tablecloth. "Don't hover," Elijah snapped, finally looking up. His eyes, a cold steel blue, narrowed as they landed on her. It wasn't a look of recognition, it was a look of assessment, like he was inspecting a piece of furniture for scratches. "You're new. Where is Julian?" "Julian is out sick tonight, sir. I'll be taking care of you." Elijah scoffed, returning his attention to his tablet. "Just bring the wine, and try to disappear. I'm expecting a call, and I don't need the help breathing down my neck." Ilara nodded and retreated. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was used to rude customers. Entitlement came with the territory of fine dining, but Elijah Charles radiated a specific kind of toxicity. It was the arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. As she waited at the bar for the wine, she watched him from a distance. He wasn't just eating dinner. He was working. He had spread several folders out on the pristine white tablecloth, disregarding the restaurant's strict no business papers etiquette. He was clearly agitated. He kept checking his heavy platinum watch, tapping his foot impatiently. "He's in a mood," the bartender, Leo, whispered as he handed her the bottle of 2015 Bordeaux. "Apparently, the merger with the Shenzhou group is on the rocks, billions on the line. He treats people like dirt regardless of his bank account," Ilara murmured, taking the bottle. "Careful, Ilara," Leo warned. "Charles is the kind of guy who gets people blacklisted just for fun. He's tipped 0 3 times this month." Ilara griped the bottle. She needed the tips. Her mother's medication had gone up in price again, and the rent was due in 3 days. She had to swallow her pride. She had to be invisible. She had to be perfect. She returned to the table, presenting the label. "The 2015, sir." Elijah didn't even glance at it. He waved a hand dismissively. "Pour." She poured the wine with expert precision, not spilling a single drop, twisting the bottle at the end to catch the bead. She placed the glass near his right hand. "Wait," Elijah said. Ilara froze. "Sir?" He picked up the glass, swirled it violently, and took a sip. He grimaced, slamming the glass down so hard the stem nearly snapped. "Corked," he declared loudly. Ilara knew it wasn't. She had smelled the cork herself. The wine was impeccable. "Sir, I can assure you." "I said it's corked." Elijah raised his voice, causing the couple at the adjacent table to jump. "Are you arguing with me? Do you know more about wine than I do? Take it away. Bring me another. And God help you if you waste my time again." I apologize, Mr. Charles." Ilara took the bottle, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the room on her. The wealthy patrons watched with a mix of pity and amusement. To them she was just part of the scenery, a malfunction in the machinery of their luxury. She retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking. "He sent it back," Henry hissed, looking at the full bottle. "That's a $400 bottle, Ilara." "He said it was corked." "It's not," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tremors in her hands. "Just get him another one." "Now!" Henry pushed her towards the cellar. Ilara closed her eyes for a brief second. For Mom, she told herself. Just get through the shift. Just get the money. But as she walked back out to the floor, she saw a man in a dark grey suit enter the restaurant. He was carrying a black leather briefcase and looked terrified. He hurried over to Elijah's table. This was the messenger Elijah had been waiting for. Ilara sensed the atmosphere shift. The air around table 4 grew heavy with tension. She approached slowly to refill his water, trying to remain unnoticed. But she was walking straight into the eye of the storm. The man in the grey suit was named Mr. Galloway. Ilara knew this because Elijah didn't bother lowering his voice. "You're late, Galloway," Elijah growled, not inviting the man to sit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Charles," Galloway stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "The encryption key took longer to bypass than we anticipated. The files from the Shanghai branch. They were heavily protected." "I don't pay you for excuses. I pay you for results," Elijah snapped. "Do you have the contract?" "Yes, sir. But there's a problem." Galloway opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. It wasn't standard letter paper. It was bound in a red folder with gold embossing. The Shenzhou group sent the final draft, but they've invoked the cultural sovereignty clause. The entire addendum regarding the asset forfeiture is in Mandarin. Technical, legal Mandarin. And they need the signature by midnight, Beijing time. Elijah snatched the document from Galloway's hands. Mandarin. We have translators for this. That's the problem, sir, Galloway whispered, looking around nervously. It's 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Our lead translator is on a flight to London, and the agency is saying they can't get a verified legal expert on a secure line for at least 2 hours. If we wait, the window closes. The deal dies. Ilara was standing just 3 feet away, holding the water pitcher. She shouldn't have been listening, but the word Mandarin triggered a reflex deep inside her brain. It was a part of her life she had buried years ago, a door she had locked when poverty forced her to drop out of her PhD program. Elijah flipped through the pages of the document. His face grew redder with every page turn. This is absurd. I can read the numbers, I can see the figures, but the terms, the liability clauses. He slammed his fist on the table. They're trying to hide something. They know I can't read this, and they're banking on me signing it blindly because of the deadline. Sir, maybe we should wait, Galloway suggested weakly. If we wait, the stock price drops by morning, Elijah hissed. I need to know what paragraph 4, section B says, right now. He looked around the room, his eyes wild with frustration. His gaze landed on Ilara, who was silently refilling his water glass. In his anger, he lashed out at the nearest, easiest target. You! Elijah barked. Ilara jumped slightly, a drop of water splashing onto the linen tablecloth. A tiny dime-sized wet spot. Elijah stared at the spot like it was a gunshot wound. He looked up at Ilara, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated malice. He needed to hurt someone, and she was the only one standing there. Look at that, Elijah said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. You can't even pour water correctly. I'm so sorry, sir. You startled me. Startled you? Elijah let out a cruel, dry laugh. He turned to Galloway. You see this? This is why the world is failing. Incompetence everywhere. I'm dealing with billion-dollar mergers, and I'm being served by a woman who lacks the motor skills of a toddler. Ilara bit her lip. Don't cry. Do not let him see you cry. I will change the tablecloth immediately, sir. Leave it, Elijah commanded. I want to be reminded of why I pay for excellence, to avoid people like you. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He looked at the complex document in front of him, then back at Ilara. A twisted idea seemed to form in his mind. He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to prove the gap between his world and hers. Tell me, Elijah sneered, picking up the document and waving it in her face. You're a waitress, that's it, right? That's the ceiling of your existence, carrying food to people who actually matter. I am working to support my family, sir, Ilara said, her voice tight. There is dignity in all work. Dignity? Elijah laughed. Dignity is power. Dignity is intelligence. Dignity is not wearing an apron and spilling water. He slammed the document down on the edge of the table, right in front of her. The pages fell open to the dense, character-filled text of the addendum. You know what this is? Elijah asked, his voice dripping with condescension. This is the language of the future. This is what power looks like. But to you, it probably looks like scribbles, doesn't it? Ilara looked down at the paper. Her eyes scanned the characters. Zishun Zhuanyi Xieyi. Asset Transfer Agreement. Disi Tiao, Article 4. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the dialect. It wasn't just standard Mandarin. It was written in a highly formal, legalistic register, used specifically in contract law in the Zhejiang province. Cat got your tongue? Elijah taunted. He looked at Galloway and smirked. See, this is the difference, Galloway. Some people are born to lead, to understand the complexities of the world, and some people are born to serve because their brains can't handle anything more complex than sparkling or still. He turned back to Ilara, his face inches from hers. "If you're so smart," he whispered, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "then translate it. Go on. Read this paragraph. Tell me what it says." The room had gone quiet. People were watching. It was a cruel, impossible test. He expected her to stammer, to apologize, to run away in tears. He expected her to be the illiterate servant in his personal narrative of superiority. Ilara looked at Elijah. She saw the cruelty in his eyes. She thought of her mother lying in the dialysis clinic. She thought of the PhD thesis on Sino-Tibetan comparative linguistics that sat gathering dust in her closet. The thesis she had abandoned 3 years ago when the medical bills started piling up. She looked at the document again. And for the first time that night, Ilara Moore didn't look like a waitress. She straightened her spine. The fatigue seemed to vanish from her face, replaced by a sharp, intellectual intensity that Elijah hadn't bothered to notice before. She didn't run. She didn't apologize. She reached out and placed her hand on the paper. "Actually, Mr. Charles," Ilara said, her voice clear, steady, and ringing with an authority that made Galloway sit up straight. "It's not just an asset transfer. It's a shell game." Elijah blinked. "Excuse me." "Paragraph 4, Section B," Ilara continued, her finger tracing the column of characters. "You think this clause protects your intellectual property during the merger, but you're misreading the character context." She looked him dead in the eye. "It doesn't say shared custody of the data. It says immediate and total forfeiture of all proprietary algorithms to the parent company upon signature." Elijah froze. The sneer fell from his face, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawn, and finally sheer terror. "If you sign this," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a judge's gavel, "you aren't merging with them, Mr. Charles. You're giving them your entire company for free, and they are legally allowed to fire you the next day." The silence that followed was louder than the crashing china had been. Elijah stared at the waitress, his mouth slightly open, the impossible reality of what she had just said crashing down on him. The silence that had descended over table 4 was heavy, suffocating. It felt less like a pause in conversation, and more like the air pressure drop before a tornado touches down. Elijah Charles did not blink. He sat frozen, his hand hovering halfway to the document, his expensive platinum watch glinting under the ambient lighting. The sheer absurdity of the moment seemed to short-circuit his brain. A waitress, a woman he had just verbally flayed for spilling a drop of water, was now telling him that his billion-dollar merger was a suicide pact. "Excuse me?" Elijah finally breathed out. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. His voice was dangerously low, a rumble of thunder. "What did you just say?" Ilara didn't step back. The adrenaline was flooding her system now, washing away the fatigue and the fear. For the first time in years, she wasn't Ilara the server. She was Ilara the scholar. "I said," she repeated, her voice steady and precise, enunciating every syllable, "that paragraph 4 is a trap. The Shenzhou Group isn't merging with EtherLogic. They are acquiring it, and they are using the pretext of Chinese data security laws, specifically the Cultural Sovereignty Clause, to force you to surrender your source code before the money even hits your bank account." "That's insane," Galloway, the anxious lawyer, squeaked. He looked terrified, glancing between his boss and the waitress. "We vetted the English summary. It said nothing about forfeiture." "Because the English summary is a summary," Ilara corrected him gently, though her eyes remained locked on Elijah. "And the binding text is the Mandarin original. Look at the character combination in the 3rd line of the 2nd column." She pointed a slender finger at the paper, careful not to touch it. "You see that? Zhuan Rang, Ilara said. In standard conversation, it means transfer. But in the context of Zhejiang provincial contract law, when paired with the antecedent Wu Tiaojian, which is right there, it creates a legal compulsion known as unconditional surrender of rights. It's not a partnership, Mr. Charles. It's a handover. Elijah looked down at the paper. The black ink characters stared back at him, mocking his ignorance. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back, cold and sharp. He prided himself on being the smartest man in every room. He was the shark. He was the predator. But right now, he felt like he had swum into a net. "Henri!" Elijah roared suddenly, startling the entire dining room. Henri, the floor manager, materialized instantly, his face pale and sweating. He looked as though he expected to be executed on the spot. "Mr. Charles, I am so deeply sorry. Is this girl bothering you? I will have her removed immediately. Ilara, get away from—" "Shut up!" Elijah snapped, not even looking at the manager. He held up a hand to silence him. "If you speak again, I will buy this building and evict you. Go stand by the door." Henri's mouth clicked shut. He retreated, trembling, watching with wide eyes. Elijah turned his gaze back to Ilara. The contempt was still there, but it was now mixed with a frantic, paranoid skepticism. He couldn't believe her. He wouldn't believe her, because if she was right, he had almost signed his life away. And if she was right, it meant a waitress was intellectually superior to his entire legal team. "You expect me to believe this?" Elijah sneered, leaning forward. "You? A woman who clears crumbs for a living? You think you know more about international contract law than Galloway here, who charges $800 an hour. Mr. Galloway is looking for standard clauses," Ilara replied calmly. "He's looking for what should be there. I'm reading what is there." "Prove it," Elijah challenged. He grabbed the document and flipped it to a random page near the back. He slammed his finger onto a block of dense text. "Translate this. Right now. If you're bluffing, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." The threat hung in the air. Ilara looked at the page. The text was smaller here, dense with footnotes. She took a breath, letting her eyes scan the vertical columns. It took her 3 seconds. "This is the indemnity section," Ilara said. "It states that in the event of a regulatory inquiry by the Chinese government, Etherlogic assumes full criminal liability for any data breaches, retroactive to 2018. She paused, then added the dagger. "And it specifically names the CEO, you, Mr. Charles, as the responsible person for any prison time served." Galloway dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. "Prison time?" Galloway whispered, his face draining of blood. That wasn't in the draft." Elijah felt the room spin. He grabbed his water glass, the one Ilara had refilled, and downed it in one gulp. He wasn't looking at her like she was a servant anymore. He was looking at her like she was a magic trick he couldn't figure out. "Galloway," Elijah rasped. "Get the translator on the phone, now." "Sir, they said 2 hours. I don't care if you have to drag him out of bed or hijack his plane. Get a second opinion, now." Galloway scrambled for his phone, his fingers shaking so hard he could barely dial. He ran toward the vestibule to make the call, leaving Elijah alone with Ilara. The dynamic at the table had shifted fundamentally. Elijah remained seated, but he seemed smaller. Ilara stood tall, her hands clasped respectfully behind her back, but she held all the power. "Why?" Elijah asked quietly. The venom was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating curiosity. "Why are you telling me this? You could have let me sign it. I treated you like garbage. You could have watched me ruin myself." Ilara looked down at him. She thought about the tip he would withhold. She thought about the way he had snapped his fingers at her. Part of her, the part that was tired and angry, wanted to see him burn. Because, Ilara said softly, accuracy matters. The truth matters, even if the person hearing it doesn't deserve it. Elijah narrowed his eyes. He studied her face, searching for a lie, for a hustle. He was used to people wanting something from him. Money, status, access. But she was just standing there, waiting to be dismissed. "You're not a waitress," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You're wearing the uniform, you're doing the job, but you are not a waitress. Who are you?" The question hung between them, suspending time. "Who are you?" Ilara felt a familiar ache in her chest. It was the ache of a phantom limb, the life she used to have, the future she had almost grasped before it was snatched away. She looked around the opulent restaurant. To the other patrons, she was just a silhouette in a black vest and white shirt. To Henri, she was a liability. To her landlord, she was a late check. "I'm Ilara Moore," she said simply. "Don't play games with me," Elijah said, his intensity returning. He tapped the table. "You don't learn legal Mandarin watching kung fu movies. You don't understand retroactive criminal liability by reading fortune cookies. Where did you learn to read this?" Ilara hesitated. Talking about her past usually hurt too much. It felt like picking at a scab that refused to heal. But tonight, the seal had been broken. "I spent 4 years at Cambridge University," she said, her voice low, "and 2 years at Yale." Elijah's eyebrows shot up. "You're an Ivy Leaguer? Then what on earth are you doing refilling my water glass?" "I was a dual PhD candidate in Sino-Tibetan linguistics and international contractual ethics," Ilara continued, ignoring his incredulity. "My thesis was on the linguistic manipulation of trade agreements in the post-2000 Asian market. I analyzed exactly these types of documents. I wrote papers on how corporations use dialect nuances to hide liability." She stared at the document on the table. It looked like an old friend, a dangerous, toxic friend. "I was the youngest candidate in my department," she added, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I was supposed to publish my dissertation 3 years ago." "So what happened?" Elijah demanded. He was leaning in now, fascinated. He loved broken things. He loved finding the flaw in the diamond. "Did you cheat? Plagiarize? Get kicked out?" "Life happened, Mr. Charles," Ilara said, her voice hardening slightly. "My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 renal failure. The insurance refused to cover the experimental treatment she needed. It was either stay in school and let her die, or drop out, move back to New York, and work 3 jobs to pay for her dialysis." She looked him in the eye, her gaze unflinching. "I chose my mother. I liquidated my savings. I defaulted on my student loans. And now I work here. And I work at a diner in the mornings, and I freelance copy edit on weekends." Elijah sat back, stunned. He lived in a world where money was just a number on a screen, a tool to keep score. He couldn't fathom the idea of sacrificing a prestigious career for something as sentimental as family medical bills. To him, that was a bad trade. A poor ROI. But looking at the intelligence in her eyes, he realized something. This woman wasn't just smart, she was formidable. She had endured a pressure cooker that would have crushed a man like Galloway in a week. "You traded a PhD for an apron," Elijah muttered. "I traded a degree for my mother's life," Ilara corrected him. "I don't regret it. But it means I don't have patience for people who have everything and treat it like nothing." For a moment, Elijah looked almost ashamed. Almost. Just then, Galloway came sprinting back into the dining room. He was breathless, his face a mask of pure panic. He was holding his phone out like it was a grenade. "Mr. Charles!" Galloway gasped, skidding to a halt at the table. "I got hold of the agency. I sent them a photo of the paragraph she pointed out." "And?" Elijah demanded, not looking away from Ilara. "She's right," Galloway choked out. "My God, she's exactly right. The translator said the phrasing is archaic but legally binding. It's a total forfeiture clause. If you had signed that, we would have lost the proprietary code for the AI project. We would have lost everything by tomorrow morning." Galloway looked at Ilara with a mixture of awe and fear. He asked who was reading the document. He said there are maybe only 50 people in the US who would catch that nuance without a legal dictionary. Elijah slowly turned his head to look at the document again. The paper that had been a weapon against him was now a shield, thanks to the woman standing beside him. He had called her incompetent. He had called her clumsy. He had humiliated her in front of the city's elite. And she had just saved him from a mistake that would have cost him billions. The weight of the silence returned. This time, Elijah didn't break it with a shout. He broke it with a gesture. He reached out and closed the folder. "Galloway," Elijah said quietly. "Pack up." "Sir, pack up. The deal is off. Call Shenju and tell them to go to hell. Tell them I know about the forfeiture clause." "Yes, sir. Immediately." Galloway began scrambling to gather the papers. Elijah stood up. For the first time all night, he stood to his full height in front of Ilara. He was a tall man, imposing, but Ilara didn't shrink away. He looked at her name tag. Ilara. "You saved my company," Elijah said. It sounded foreign, coming from his mouth, like he was speaking a language he hadn't practiced. "I was just doing my job, sir," Ilara replied formally, anticipating the guest's needs. "No," Elijah shook his head. "Your job is to bring me wine. You just did my lawyer's job better than he did." He reached into his jacket pocket. Ilara flinched internally, expecting him to pull out a wad of cash, a degrading tip to pay her off for the help. She prepared herself to refuse it. She didn't want his pity money, but Elijah didn't pull out his wallet. He pulled out a sleek, black business card holder. He extracted a heavy metal card embossed with silver lettering. He placed it on the table, right next to the water glass she had filled. "Report to my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Elijah said. His voice was no longer the bored drawl of a diner. It was the sharp, commanding tone of a CEO making an executive decision. "I have a shift tomorrow morning," Ilara said, confused. "Not anymore," Elijah said. He looked at Henri, who was watching from the shadows. "Henri, get over here." Henri rushed over, wringing his hands. "Yes, Mr. Charles, I apologize for everything. I will." "Fire her," Elijah said, pointing at Ilara. Ilara's heart stopped. The blood drained from her face. "What?" she gasped. "Sir, please, I need this job. I have bills, I just told you." "Mr. Charles, please," Henri stammered. "I said fire her," Elijah repeated, his eyes locked on Ilara's. "Process her final check. Tonight." Ilara felt tears stinging her eyes. After everything, after saving him, he was going to fire her just to prove he could. It was the ultimate act of cruelty. "You're a monster," Ilara whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Elijah ignored her. He turned to Galloway. "Galloway, give her your visitor badge." My badge? Give it to her." Galloway unclipped his badge and handed it to a stunned Ilara. Elijah leaned in close to Ilara, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I'm firing you from Le Sommet, Ilara. Because you're wasting your time here. You're not a waitress, and I'm not going to let the smartest person in this room refill water glasses while my legal team misses billion-dollar loopholes." He tapped the metal card on the table. 8 a.m. Don't be late, and dress for a boardroom, not a kitchen. Elijah turned and walked toward the exit, his coat billowing behind him. He didn't look back. Elara stood frozen, the metal card glinting under the chandelier. Henry looked at her, his mouth open. Galloway looked at her, badgeless and confused. She looked down at the card. It wasn't a general company card. It had a direct line number and a title embossed under a blank space. Senior Consultant, International Strategy. She wasn't just being hired. She was being poached. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan like a cold, grey coin. Elara stood on the sidewalk in front of the EtherLogic headquarters, a 70-story monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. She felt small. She was wearing her best outfit, a charcoal blazer she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for a conference she never got to attend, and a pair of black slacks that she had carefully ironed until the creases were razor-sharp. But reflected in the towering glass doors, she didn't look like a high-powered consultant. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman holding on to the edge of a cliff by her fingernails. Name? The security guard asked without looking up. He was sitting behind a marble desk that cost more than Elara's mother's car. Elara Moore, she said, her voice steady. I have an 8 a.m. meeting with Mr. Charles. The guard paused. He looked up, scanning her worn shoes, her sensible bag, the lack of an expensive watch. He let out a short, dismissive breath. Deliveries are on 44th Street, miss. Use the freight elevator. I'm not a delivery, Elara said, tightening her grip on her bag. I'm here to see the CEO. Look, lady, the guard sighed, leaning back. Mr. Charles doesn't take walk-ins from people not on the list. If you're here for the catering interview, that's on the 2nd floor. Elara felt the familiar sting of invisibility. It was the same feeling she had at Le Sommet. To the world, she was just labor. She was hands to carry things, not a mind to solve things. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the heavy metal card Elijah had given her. She slapped it onto the marble surface. It made a solid, resonant thud that cut through the lobby's ambient noise. Scan it, she commanded. The guard blinked. He picked up the card, turned it over, and saw the embedded microchip. His demeanor changed instantly. He ran it through the reader. The light turned green. Level 60. Executive boardroom, he said, his voice trembling slightly. My apologies, Miss Moore. The elevator is to your right. It's the private one. Elara took back the card. Thank you. The ride up to the 60th floor was smooth and silent. As the doors slid open, Elara stepped into a world of hushed power. The carpet was thick, muffling her footsteps. The walls were lined with abstract art. She was led by an assistant to the boardroom. The double doors were mahogany, heavy and intimidating. The assistant opened them, and Elara walked in. The conversation inside died instantly. Around a massive oval table sat 12 people. They were the inner circle of EtherLogic. Men in bespoke Italian suits, women with perfect hair and icy stares. At the head of the table sat Elijah Charles. He looked different here than he did in the restaurant. At Le Sommet, he was a rude diner. Here, he was a king on his throne. He was reading a file, and he didn't look up immediately. You're 3 minutes early, Elijah said. Better than late, Elara replied, walking to the foot of the table. There were no empty chairs except one. It wasn't at the table. It was a folding chair placed against the wall, clearly an afterthought. Who is this, Elijah? Asked a woman sitting to his right. She was striking, platinum blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a white suit that looked like armor. Her eyes were green and cold. This was Victoria Sterling, the chief operating officer. "This," Elijah said, finally looking up, "is the reason we still own our source code today. Everyone, meet Ilara Moore." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Galloway, who was sitting near the end, looked down at his notepad, ashamed. "The waitress?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with amusement. "You brought the waitress from dinner into a board meeting? Elijah, is this a joke? We have the quarterly earnings report to discuss." "It's not a joke, Victoria," Elijah said, his voice hardening. "Ilara found a fatal flaw in the Shenzhou contract that your entire legal department missed. She reads 3 dialects of Mandarin and understands dialectical contractual entrapment. What do you understand, Victoria, apart from how to maximize your bonus?" The room went deadly silent. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed into slits. "She has no clearance," Victoria said smoothly. "She's a liability. We deal with sensitive data. You can't just pick up strays and give them access to the mainframe." "I'm not a stray," Ilara spoke up. Her voice was calm, projecting to the back of the room. "And I don't need access to your mainframe to see that this company is bleeding." Victoria turned in her chair to face Ilara. "Excuse me." Ilara walked toward the whiteboard at the side of the room. She grabbed a marker. The fear was gone. This was her arena now. She had spent years teaching classrooms, defending theses, analyzing data. "I did some reading last night," Ilara said. "Publicly available records. Your stock has dipped 4% in the last quarter despite record revenue. Why?" She drew a quick diagram on the board. "You're expanding into the Asian markets, but you're using Western negotiation tactics. You're pushing for dominance in your contracts." She wrote the word dominance and crossed it out. "But the markets you're entering value guanxi, relationships and face. By being aggressive, you aren't showing strength. You're showing lack of sophistication. That's why the Shenzhou deal almost killed you. They were offended by your arrogance, so they tried to trick you." She capped the marker and turned to the board. "You don't need a shark," Ilara said, looking directly at Elijah. "You need a diplomat who speaks the language of the enemy. If you want to survive the next fiscal year, you need to stop trying to conquer the market and start trying to translate it." For 10 seconds, no one moved. Elijah leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the look of a gambler who had just bet on a dark horse and won. "Victoria," Elijah said, not looking at her, "get Ilara a chair, a real one, and put her on the payroll. Starting salary is 150,000. "But," Victoria started. "And Victoria," Elijah added, his eyes cold, "if she finds another mistake you missed, she gets your office." Ilara stood tall as the assistant scrambled to bring a leather chair to the table. She sat down. She had entered the fortress. But as she caught Victoria's gaze, she realized something terrifying. She hadn't just gotten a job. She had just painted a target on her back. 3 weeks later, the novelty of the waitress genius had worn off, replaced by a grinding, high-pressure reality. Ilara was drowning in work. Elijah didn't believe in easing people in. He had thrown her onto 3 major projects simultaneously: a merger with a German robotics firm, a compliance audit for their Brazil branch, and the ongoing cleanup of the Shenzhou disaster. She was working 18-hour days. She barely saw her mother, though she had hired a private nurse with her first paycheck. The first time in years, she could sleep knowing her mother was safe. But the atmosphere inside Ether Logic was toxic. She was an outsider. The other executives, all Ivy League graduates with years of corporate climbing under their belts, viewed her as a freakish experiment of the CEO. They stopped talking when she entered the break room. Emails she was copied on accidentally got deleted before reaching her inbox. The ringleader of the isolation was Victoria Sterling. Victoria never yelled. She never made a scene. She was far more dangerous than that. She was polite. She would smile at Elara in the hallway and ask, "How are you adjusting, dear? It must be so overwhelming compared to previous duties." It was a Wednesday afternoon when the trap sprung. Elara was in her office, a small, glass-walled room she had fought hard to keep organized. She was reviewing the German merger files when her computer screen flickered. A red window popped up. Access denied. Security protocol breach. "That's weird," Elara muttered. She tried to log back in. Nothing. Suddenly, her door flew open. It wasn't Elijah. It was two large men in dark suits, corporate security. Behind them stood Victoria, looking grim, and Galloway, looking sick. "Elara Moore," Victoria said, her voice loud enough for the entire open-plan floor to hear. "Please step away from the computer." "What's going on?" Elara stood up, her heart hammering. "We've detected a massive data exfiltration from your terminal," Victoria said, stepping into the office. She looked sad, almost disappointed. Gigabytes of proprietary user data being sent to an external server, specifically a server linked to the Shenzhou group. Elara froze. "That's impossible. I haven't emailed anyone outside the company." "The logs don't lie, Elara," Victoria sighed. She turned to the security guards. "Escort her to the boardroom. Mr. Charles is waiting, and confiscate her phone." "I didn't do this," Elara protested, as one of the guards grabbed her arm. "This is a setup." "Don't make a scene," Victoria hissed, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal a gleam of triumph. "You've already embarrassed this company enough." They marched her through the office like a criminal. People stared. The whispers were audible. I knew it. She was too good to be true. Once a waitress, always a hustler. In the boardroom, Elijah was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He looked furious. On the table lay a stack of printed server logs. "Elijah," Elara said, shaking off the guard's grip. "I didn't do this. You have to believe me." Elijah turned around. His face was a mask of stone. "The IP address traces back to your login, Elara. The timestamp matches the time you were in your office alone. And we found this." He threw a folder on the table. It slid across the mahogany surface. Elara opened it. It was her credit report. "Over $100,000 in debt," Elijah said coldly. "Medical bills, student loans. You're desperate, Elara, and desperate people do stupid things." "I am paying those off," Elara cried. "With the salary you pay me. Why would I steal from you?" "Because Shenzhou pays more," Victoria interjected, walking into the room. "We know they approached you. It's the perfect story, isn't it? The underdog who infiltrates the big bad corporation to sell their secrets." Victoria walked over to Elijah, placing a hand on his arm. "I told you, Elijah. You can't trust people like her. They don't have our loyalty. They survive. That's all they do." Elijah looked at Elara. For a moment, she saw hesitation in his eyes. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was a man of data, and the data said she was a traitor. "I need you to leave the building, Elara," Elijah said quietly, "pending an investigation. If this is verified, we will be pressing criminal charges." "You're making a mistake," Elara said, her voice shaking. She looked at Victoria. "She did this. She's been trying to get rid of me since day one." "That is a pathetic deflection," Victoria scoffed. "Get her out of here." The guards moved in. Elara's mind raced. She was being cornered. She looked at the server logs on the table. She only had seconds before they dragged her out. "Wait," Elara said. She lunged forward, not at Elijah, but at the papers. "Hey!" the guard shouted, grabbing her shoulder. "Just look!" Elara screamed, slamming her hand onto the log sheet. "Look at the time stamp! 14 Sasotot hours!" "So what?" Elijah snapped. "You were in your office." "Yes, I was," Elara said, breathing hard. "But look at the command syntax used to export the files." She pointed to the string of code. "Sudo execute, batch transfer, auth, admin 02. "I don't have admin level 2 clearance," Elara said, looking Elijah in the eye. "I only have level 4. I physically cannot execute that command. The system would reject my badge." Elijah froze. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at Victoria. "Admin 02, Elijah muttered. "That's an executive clearance level." "She probably hacked it," Victoria said quickly, her voice pitching up slightly. "She's a genius, remember? That's what you keep telling us." "I'm a linguist, not a hacker," Elara shot back. "I can translate Mandarin contract law. I can't bypass a quantum-encrypted firewall in 3 weeks." Elara turned to Elijah. "Who has admin Nerot clearance, Elijah? Who was in the building at 2 p.m.? Elijah looked at Victoria. He slowly pulled his arm away from her touch. "Victoria," Elijah said, his voice dangerously low. "Your clearance is admin 02. "This is ridiculous," Victoria laughed, but the sound was brittle. "Are you going to take the word of a thief over your COO? I've been with you for 10 years, Elijah." "Exactly," Elara said, her mind working faster than it ever had in the PhD program. 10 years. You were here when the Shenzhou deal was drafted the first time. You were the one who vetted the contract, weren't you? The one I found the mistake in." Elara stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "It wasn't a mistake, was it, Victoria? You didn't miss the forfeiture clause. You ignored it. You wanted Elijah to sign it." The room went deathly silent. "Why would I destroy my own company?" Victoria spat. "Not destroy," Elara said. "Sell. If EtherLogic was acquired by Shenzhou, the executive payout clause would trigger. You'd make $50 million overnight, and you'd be done with Elijah, who you've hated working for, haven't you?" Victoria's face went pale. Elijah stared at his COO. He looked like a man waking up from a long, bad dream. He walked over to the console on the wall and typed in a command. The main screen lit up. "Computer," Elijah said. "Show me the login history for admin 02 for the last hour." The screen scrolled. Terminal 4, COO office. Remote access to Terminal 12, Elara Moore. It was there in black and white. Victoria had accessed Elara's computer remotely to plant the files. Victoria took a step back toward the door. "Elijah, I can explain. It was a stress test. I was testing her security protocols." "You tried to frame her," Elijah said, his voice shaking with rage. "And you tried to sell me out to Shenzhou." He looked at the security guards who were still holding Elara. "Let her go," Elijah ordered, "and arrest her." He pointed a trembling finger at Victoria. As the guards released Elara and moved toward Victoria, the polished executive finally lost her composure. "You think you're so smart," Victoria screamed at Elijah as they grabbed her arms. "You're nothing without us. You're just a bully in a suit, and she—" She glared at Elara with pure hatred. "She's nobody. She's a waitress. You're going to lose everything to a waitress." They dragged her out of the room, her screams echoing down the hallway. Elijah stood alone at the head of the table. He looked exhausted. He looked old. He turned to Elara. She was rubbing her arm where the guard had grabbed her. She looked tired, her blazer rumpled, her hair messy. "I almost fired you," Elijah whispered. "Yes," Elara said. "You did. I didn't trust you." "No," Elara said. "You didn't." Elijah walked over to her. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss. He looked like a human being who had just realized how alone he really was. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "After how I treated you at the restaurant. After this? Why didn't you just let her win and walk away?" Ilara looked at him. She thought of the hospital bills that were now paid. She thought of her mother, who was starting to get color back in her cheeks. But more than that, she thought of the work. "Because I'm not done yet," Ilara said. "And because you need me." Elijah let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Yes, I suppose I do." He extended a hand, not to give her a card, not to give her an order, but to shake hers. "I'm sorry, Ilara," Elijah said. Ilara took his hand. It was firm, but her grip was stronger. "Apology accepted, Mr. Charles," she said. "Now, can I have my phone back? I have a merger to finish." 6 months later, the atmosphere at Le Sommet was exactly as it had always been. Quiet, expensive, and intimidating. But tonight, the energy at Table 4 was different. Ilara Moore sat in the chair where Elijah Charles used to sit. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed authority. Her hair was styled, her posture relaxed but commanding. Across from her sat Elijah, not as a master, but as a partner. "The Asian expansion is up 200%, Elijah said, scrolling through the report on his tablet, the same tablet he had once used to ignore her. "The shareholders are calling it the Moore strategy. They want you on the cover of Forbes next month." Ilara took a sip of her sparkling water, with lemon on the side, exactly how she liked it. "I told them I'd do the interview, only if they focus on the linguistic framework of the deal, not the Cinderella angle. I'm tired of the waitress turned savior headline. I want to be known for my brain, not my background." Elijah chuckled, a genuine sound that had become more frequent in the office. "You can't fight the narrative, Ilara. People love a good story, but you're right, you're the best strategist I've ever seen. Period." Just then, a young waiter approached the table. He was trembling, clearly new. In his hands, he balanced a tray with a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. As he reached the table, his nervousness got the better of him. The bottle slipped. Smash! Red wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the cuff of Elijah's grey suit. The entire restaurant went silent. Henri, the manager, came running over, his face purple with rage. "You idiot!" Henri hissed at the young boy. "Do you know who this is? Get out. You're fired. Get out right now." The boy looked terrified, tears welling in his eyes. He started to back away, ready to accept his fate. "Stop," Elijah said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. Henry froze. "Mr. Charles, I am so sorry. I will remove him." "I said stop," Elijah repeated. He stood up and looked at the terrified waiter. Then he looked at Ilara. They shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of where they had been and where they were now. Elijah turned to the boy. "What's your name?" "Leo, sir," the boy whispered. I'm working to pay for engineering school." Elijah picked up a napkin and calmly dabbed at the wine on his sleeve. "Engineering, huh? It's a tough field, requires precision. But everyone spills something eventually, Leo. The question is, do you know how to clean it up?" "Yes, sir. I'll get the salt and soda water immediately." "Good," Elijah said. He turned to Henri. "If you fire him, Henri, Ilara and I will never eat here again, and we'll tell every board member in the city why." Henri paled. "Of course, Mr. Charles. It was just a slip." Elijah sat back down. "Leo, bring me another bottle, and breathe. It's just wine." As the boy rushed off, relieved and grateful, Elijah looked back at Ilara. "I learned that from the best," he said softly. Ilara smiled, raising her glass. You're learning, Elijah. Slowly. I have a good teacher, he replied. Now, about that merger in Tokyo. Paragraph 6, Section C. I think they're trying to trick us. Elara pulled the document toward her, her eyes sharpening with that familiar brilliance. If they are, she said, I'll translate it, and then we'll own them. They clinked glasses. The waiter, the CEO, and the invisible line between them had vanished, replaced by the only currency that truly mattered, respect. And that is the story of Elara Moore and Elijah Charles. It's a powerful reminder that intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. We often walk past people every day, servers, cleaners, drivers, without realizing the brilliance they carry inside. Elijah made the mistake of judging Elara by her apron, and it almost cost him everything. But Elara proved that dignity isn't about your job title. It's about your character, your resilience, and your mind. In the end, the most expensive thing in that restaurant wasn't the wine or the suits. It was the lesson that humility costs nothing, but arrogance can cost you a fortune. Never underestimate the person serving your coffee. They might just be the one who saves your life. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people. I want to know from you. Have you ever been underestimated by a boss or someone in power? How did you prove them wrong? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.